and welcome to Blowing Smoke with Twisted Rico. I just started saying that. I used to just get right into the conversation.
Oh, like Marin style. You just kind of like
Yeah,
slip right
yeah, I
into
wish I wish I could get his style's great, man. Okay, first things first. Okay, I would practice in this. Now you people call you Alex, but your real name's Alejandro, right? Did I
That's
say
correct,
that
yeah.
right?
Yeah, you
Okay, what about Necochea?
Oh, that was close. It's very close. It's Necochea.
Necochea.
Yeah, originally it's Basque.
Alejandro Necochea. Okay, so I got to ask you, were you born in the U.S. or you from somewhere else?
I'm from somewhere. Are you checking my papers?
Hey, we got the Puerto Rican Prince engineering the show over here, Herb Morsiglio, and I didn't check his papers.
So originally I'm from South America. Santiago, Chile is where
Chile,
yeah,
the nicest people come from Chile.
right, and the most beautiful people in the world.
Yeah, everyone that goes down there says people down there are so nice.
Yeah. That's been my experience.
You're Chilean.
I'm Chilean, yeah.
And when did you come here?
So the short of it is my parents when they got together, they were college students in Chile, and I came out somewhere in the mid-'70s, like right after they had a military coup there. And since both my parents they were students, and my father, I think, had some like leftist affiliations, so my dad had to get out of the country real quick, and then my mom lost her job. And fast forward about another year, I was about 6 months old, and my father had found a benefactor to sponsor him to come here to the States, and so he sent for his wife, my mother, and as well as me and my older brother. So I've been here, ever since I was about 6 months old.
6 months old. When you say here, like where?
Oh, well, all over. Originally, my family settled in Salt Lake City, Utah. And
Really?
Yeah, my father was he was a math student. I think he was getting his bachelor's degree at the university there, and my mom was also a math student as well, but she wasn't going to the university at the time. I think she was just auditing classes and learning how to speak English, watching Days of Our Lives. And eventually, both my parents, they finished their degrees, and we relocated to Amherst, UMass.
Okay.
Where they both became doctorate students in mathematics. And so I lived in Amherst until I think I was about in the 6th grade.
Did they go to Amherst College or the University of Massachusetts?
They went to the University of Massachusetts.
ZooMass.
Yes, correctly.
Wow. So did you go to high school out there?
I didn't. So when my parents had split at some point, and so when my mother finished her dissertation and got her degree, her PhD, she got a position as an associate professor at Bucknell University in central Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So we relocated there essentially, I think, when I was going into the junior high. And so it was a real kind of strange culture shock to go from this very kind of like cosmopolitan sort of like collegiate environment in Western Massachusetts to ending up kind of like, it kind of seemed like a little bit like the Bible Belt in the middle of Pennsylvania.
I lived in Pittsburgh. We actually saw each other in Pittsburgh when I was out there. But yeah, Pennsylvania is a different ballgame, especially
really is.
central.
Yeah.
So you were out there for how long?
So I ended up going to junior high there and finished high school, and I was one of those kids who gave my mother a really hard time about I wasn't going to go to college. I was going to go move to the city, play in a rock band in my band. And my mother was like, no, that's not what we're going to be doing. So because of her position as a professor, we were very, we came to this country as immigrants, lower middle class people. And so it was really important to my mother that, she provide this pathway for my brother and I to be able to have an education and not necessarily be saddled with a lot of debt afterwards. As a young person, I was completely oblivious to that. I had no idea what it is to go out in the world to be saddled with all this debt and all that. So I eventually, I relented and say, okay, I will go to college, which is kind of ridiculous to think about now. I ended up with a degree from a somewhat respected, 4-year institution, all thanks to my mother.
I'm going to ask you what well-respected institution it was.
Yeah. So I ended up at Bucknell, and
oh, so you went to the same?
I did.
Okay,
so,
that's cool.
So
that's
what?
A good college,
what
though.
ended up? Yeah. What ended up happening was, my mother wanted me to go to college, and I was very adamant about not doing that. But she said, please, just at least apply here. It's here in your town. Just do it. And I did, and I got accepted. And long story short, I ended up going, because it was definitely the right thing to do. And there, I ended up. I didn't know what to study because I just wanted to play music, But it never ever occurred to me to actually study music. Like anytime it was kind of suggested to me that, like music is a vocation that you can actually study, you can go to school for it. Immediately, no. It was like, Sid Vicious would not have done this, Like, it never occurred to me that people who wanted to go into, like, rock music and, like, go touring and playing in clubs and things like that, it never occurred to me that anyone would go to music school first before they would do that. It's a completely different world now, and, like, I've since learned that I was very off the mark.
It's really funny. I only recently started discovering that so many rock stars went to art school. That's what they went to. That's their college major, art. Yeah. And it's like a long list.
Yeah.
And it's phenomenal. Now, I got to ask you a question. When did you actually start? When did you start listening to music, and what kind of music did you like when you were young? Like you said, mid-'70s, so I'm assuming you were a teenager in the late '80s or something?
Yeah, roughly. So I was born in 1976. My father was an enormous music fan, enormous fan of rock music, pop culture. So from a very early age, there were vinyl albums everywhere
Nice.
I stepped. I have a very visceral sense memory of looking at the first Boston album cover when I was probably about 3 years old and thinking to myself, spaceship, cool, like what is this? Another one was ELO, and I remember like putting those two records next to each other. And,
Spacey.
Yeah, and then the other thing, so my father was a big music fan, but he was also a big partier too. And, I managed to put this together many, many years after the fact, but one of my earliest memories was, my parents were never together. Like, so whenever my dad had us on the weekends, it was a weekend of organizing his record collection, which I think was meant to keep me out of his hair. But then
what a great job, though, when you think about it. You probably didn't think it was them, but now.
Oh, my God. So a lot of his friends were local musicians in Amherst and Northampton, and I think he was a fixture like down there at Pearl Street. And
oh yeah.
And so he would like tell stories about the Go-Go's and like not the Sex Pistols, but like PIL would come through, and I kind of got the sense that my dad kind of saw himself as like, these are my people, like this is what I do.
That's cool.
Yeah, there was a live Kinks record that came out around the time that was half recorded at UMass. And my father, every time we listened to that record, which was a lot, would swear that there is a scream on that album that is him.
That's
so
funny.
From there, really what had happened was he got me involved in like listening to all this music that he was really into, like things like The Damned and Black Flag. But also he had friends who played in local bands, and they would come out and they would come hang out at my dad's apartment. I think
he was in Amherst still?
Yeah, while he was in Amherst. And so one of my earliest memories, and I wanted to mention this to you because I heard you talking to Paul Coldery, is that my dad was friends with the Sex Execs. They used to come to his apartment. And I have this very clear memory. It had to have been in the summer of 1983, where the Sex Execs were playing on the Common at UMass, but they came over to my dad's apartment. They must have been pre-partying, as you do. And I was so over the moon to show them this new album called Pyromania that I had just bought. And they were very polite to me. I must have been like 5 or 6 years old. And when we went to the show, they started with like this little like vignette where they're just kind of like just jamming, making noise, and their singer is on stage making a speech. And I don't know what's going on. I'm just seeing a live band out there. And my dad's girlfriend, I remember, she like nudged me. She's like, "Hey, they're making fun of you." I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Yeah, they're completely ripping apart that Def Leppard record that you showed them."
That is funny. You get the year right too, because the Sex Execs. That's around the time that they were happening, '83.
It must have been.
Yeah.
I have such a strong memory of watching my dad run up to the stage when they would be like, waiting for the encore. My dad would be pounding on the stage, screaming, "Martini Time."
Oh,
Kinda
yeah,
like that
yeah,
was one of
yeah,
their
yeah.
tunes.
Yeah.
And so all these years later, I ended up moving to Boston in 1998, and you go through the lore of who's done what. Coldery and Slade, made those records with Radiohead and Hole, and like at some point, it became apparent to me. I was like, holy shit, those are the guys
That
from
is
the Sex
so
Execs.
cool, dude.
Yeah.
Wow. So when did you actually start playing?
I think it must have been the summer of 1988. My whole deal was, I remember,
So you were about what, 12?
it was about 11
Yeah.
or 12, yeah. I wanted to play the drums, but we lived in university housing in Amherst, and so it's small. And I'm sure my mother didn't entertain for a moment that we'd put a set of drums in our small apartment. So I had a summer job for the first time when I was in going into the seventh grade. And I think I had like $200 by the end of the summer. And I went to Sears and I bought like a Stratocaster. It looked just like Jakey Lee, his like
Yeah.
black and white Strat. Because by then I was heavily ensconced in listening to things like hair metal, Ozzy, and
That's what I was going to ask you.
Randy
So you
Rhoads
got
and things
into
like
the
that.
80s metal thing.
I did, yeah. So that's how I ended up, playing music. Like playing guitar was really my last choice. I wanted to play the drums. I wanted to be a singer. I think I even wanted to be a bass player too. But it was the fact that I ended up at like Sears and saw the guitar there in its all shiny glory, and I'm like, okay. And that's pretty much how I ended up there.
Cool. Let's fast forward here a little bit. I was looking at some of your history and some of these early bands that you played in. The Gasolines. I couldn't tell you anything about them. The Vershock. And I remember this when I met. I think it was the first time we actually really met was in Pittsburgh. And you said that you were in the Good North.
Yeah.
And I know I dissed the singer of that band. And then when you left the room and walked out, I said to Bob Maloney, I said, Bob, you probably think I'm an asshole for saying that, right?
Oh, no, you're probably right on the money.
And Bob goes, nah, that guy was a dick.
We're just kidding, Luke.
It was because of a review that he wrote, because
really?
he was a writer and he ticked me off. But I didn't come on here to diss anyone of you. And I'm not going to say anything negative about anyone. But those bands, like the Good North was not a heavy rock band. I saw
No.
the Good North.
The Good North was like, I thought they were a great band. They were like a group of kids, 20 to 25 years old, kind of doing this thing that was kind of happening in Boston, where we had all these American kids kind of rehashing like a lot of like the Britpop stuff that we heard in the 90s. Like we had a lot of like Oasis and Blur fans and Pulp fans, and we had a lot of those people who were not only were they big fans of like those movements, but they were actually really great musicians too. And they started forming their own bands, just like you would hope that that they would when you're growing up and you kind of get yourself into a scene. And the Good North was one of those bands.
Yeah, they were on Primary Voltage, and a band I managed when I first moved to Boston, right when you got here. Actually, I got here around the same time. I managed the Charms, and
the
they
Charms,
were on
yeah.
Primary Voltage,
That's
and
right,
there was
that's
a
right.
show in New York, a big showcase, and the Good North. Baby Strange, I think, was on
Yeah.
that. I can't remember all of those.
I met
bands.
Steven Van Zandt at that show.
Yeah, he came.
Yeah.
We ended up working with Van Zandt because the Charms got signed to us.
I remember all of that. Yeah. So I remember that show.
Yeah.
That was.
So maybe we did meet that night. Actually, we could have.
Oh, it's
'cause we were
possible.
in the same room.
I was drinking a lot in those days, so who knows?
You have a really impressive history after that. So did Bang? Okay, first of all, I have to ask you, what was your involvement with Harmonix? Were you involved with them?
Not me directly. I have a lot of friends who, came up as programmers, went to school for that sort of thing, and landed at this company here in Cambridge, Harmonix, who in the mid-aughts were kind of on the cusp of doing like these really kind of now revolutionary things like making Guitar Hero.
Yeah, very revolutionary.
And so I was never a part of that at all. Like, I'm not a computer programmer.
But you were friends with people that were.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think the short history of it was that, so I ended up playing with the Good North because I had the Gasolines, which was when I was in my early 20s. I moved to Boston, and eventually start going to shows. You meet like-minded people playing in bands, and you kind of have to put yourself out there if you want to participate. And so the Gasolines was my volley into that. Hey, I want to do this too. And so I ended up meeting those guys in the Good North at this Radiohead concert at Suffolk Downs in August of 2001, which in the years since, anybody that I have met over the years who's local, they were at that show. Like that was like the vortex that kind of spit a lot of us out, and we can all just kind of reminisce about how things were a lot easier.
It was Radiohead?
It was Radiohead. It was the Beta Band, and my God, there was somebody else. Kid Koala. It was a fucking awesome show. So anyway, I ended up meeting a lot of those Good North guys, other bands like The Information kind of.
Oh yeah, The Information. They were another one of those.
Baby
bands.
Strange, yeah. What are they called? The December Sound. They were another one of those bands. So we kind of coalesced as kind of like this Britpop scene here. Personally, I had a hard time connecting to it because
I'm wondering about that. Right?
It was strange to me. It was like, I remember at the time when I was younger, I probably sneered a little bit at it because it didn't make much sense to me as what I wanted to do.
That's why I was surprised when you said you were in the Good North.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a second, this guy in Worshipper was in the Good North. Yeah. It took me by surprise when you said that.
Yeah, well, I really liked the band, and they wrote some really memorable songs, and they had a vibe. And it's the sort of thing that you can't manufacture. It's like it when you see it, and they definitely had it, and it was clear, and a lot of people really responded to that. And I for all of my experience ever since then, I can look back on that, and the experience of working with Luke O'Neill, he wasn't a vocalist or singer per se at the time, but he had the right background to kind of assume that role. And so, in retrospect, I'm really impressed with what he was able to do with that band and how he was able to turn it into kind of like a little bit of a pipe dream. And then he was able to kind of spool up, a little piece of his life and kind of change things a little bit with that experience. So, just for, that short relationship alone with Luke and seeing how all that happened, I'm really grateful for getting my foot in and seeing, how the local scene should operate, when you're in your 20s. And so what it ended up happening was I was kind of doing my Gasolines thing on the side. And so I was meeting musicians through Craigslist to play with me there. And I met a gentleman by the name of Dennis Saulnier who, to his credit, he'd played with some of the guys from Superchunk and
cool.
Was part of that scene. And that was enough to make me think I will do anything to play with this guy. And we got to put together that band, and it was such a great eye-opening experience for me that I could reach out and play with really great musicians like Dennis, and kind of make my way through it. And because of that experience, I had a bass player who ended up coming through my band, and he went on to play with a guy named Blue Macaulay. And Blue around here he was kind of turning into a little bit of an institution.
Everyone thought he was going to be really huge.
Yeah, so he got a song put on the Spider-Man soundtrack when it was all big, and I remember when that happened, I got a friend of a friend said, "Hey, you should come and audition for Blue's band." And for me, that was completely outside of anything I'd ever done before or anything I'd possibly consider, but because of his cachet, and at the time there was still some semblance of an industry that we were trying to break. So I really wanted to get into that. And fortunately, Blue took a shot on me, and I ended up playing with him and his band for a few years. And in that time, we ended up coming across this other band from New Hampshire called the Everyday Visuals, who were one of the most spectacular live groups any of us had ever seen. And they were all a bunch of teenagers. It was fucking unreal. So Blue essentially made them his band and took a couple of us along with him. And while that was kind of snowballing, I met this guy, Bryn, who played in a band called the Model Sons.
I used to see the Model Sons.
The Model
Good
Sons
band.
were so good,
Yeah.
man.
Bryn's a great guy, by the way.
Yeah, he is. He was
We'll get that right out.
Yeah.
Get that out there right away.
We, I would go see the Model Sons, and like those guys were my heroes. They had everything. They had the tattoos, they had the songs, they had the "Don't fuck with us" attitude, and so he was wrapping up whatever that band was doing, and I was kind of looking for something to do. So
Was he at Harmonix?
Yes. So
yeah.
Bryn is
trying to,
our
like,
guy at
pull this-
Harmonix.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull this all together here.
So Bryn by trade and by vocation and by education is a programmer, and so he was very well versed in that world. And so at the time when we started hanging out, I think he was either a full-time employee or maybe he was a contract employee at Harmonix, and so they were working on Guitar Hero. And then because of its success, they were working on the next iteration of it, which was Guitar Hero 2. And I don't know what the specifics are, but they left room on the game disc for local bands to appear in the game. And so we got like Anarchy Club and like Helen's band. What were they called? The Giant, I think. All these like really great
The
bands.
Giant, yeah.
Yeah. And the Acrobrats. Like we had all these bands that like with programmers and also who made really great music. And so Harmonix took a chance on us and put one of our songs on their game disc.
Which band?
This is Bang Camaro.
Okay, so you're already in.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead here.
You
so,
did,
so
because I didn't even get to ask you how Bang Camaro formed.
So this is kind of how it happened was, so they were making those games, and I'm hanging out with my new friend Bryn, and we're going out to the clubs, we're getting into trouble, we're having a lot of fun, and we had this idea that we were going to make our own band.
Yeah, this is what I want to know before we get to Guitar
Okay.
Hero is how did you come up with the idea? Because it's a crazy idea if you think about it. We're going to get 10 guys to sing in our band. How did you pull that all together?
It was purely accidental. When Bryn and I got together and started kicking around ideas, when you start working with people and making music with them, like right off the bat, it's kind of like when you meet somebody and you just start dating. It's just kind of like you're very polite, and the honeymoon kind of goes on for a little while. So Bryn and I would get together and we'd be like, hey, what kind of music do we want to make? I think we can find some common ground here. Because both he and I had kind of similar backgrounds. We're from small towns. I grew up in Pennsylvania for a while. He's from New York. And so, we thought we were just making an indie rock band.
He's from up near Buffalo or something, isn't he? Yeah.
He's from a little podunk area. No offense to the podunk area out there. And we thought we were kind of like getting into like, the things that were big at the time were like the Strokes and the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. And there was this new band that really kind of came up at the time that we were both really into called Death from Above, 1979. And I don't know if you know anything about that band. They're from Toronto. There was this two-piece, drum and bass sort of thing. But they just made this really kind of like edgy, super kind of like tough and kind of like forward-leaning kind of music. And we really kind of like got together around like, man, we should do something like this, So we get together every now and again after work, drink wine and like work on indie rock music. And then, by the late hour, we're full of wine and, ginger ale or whatever the hell we were drinking. We made some weird drinks back in those days. And we would, all of our experiences would devolve into, hey, do you remember Rock You Like a Hurricane? Like, hey, do you remember this Aussie riff? Or like, do you remember, did you ever spend any time like working on D by Randy Rhoads when he was in his classical phase? And like, well, yes, So Bryn and I were able to kind of like find a lot of common ground because we had a lot of that in our background separately. So we kind of were able to create this really easy shorthand. And so one of those nights, I think, in between working on whatever it is that we were trying to really put together, we put together like this song that had a bunch of power chords in it. And we called it Bang Camaro because we thought it was hilarious. Like, this would be funny. So the original premise was that we were going to bring back the 80s guitar solo. Because you remember, like, by the time, Nirvana came around, the whammy bar really kind of took a backseat.
Nirvana smashed
destroyed the whole thing. And, like, we very much went along with all of that, because we grew, like, the music of the 90s is really kind of when we came of age. But anyway, part of the idea was just like, why don't we kind of, go back to that kind of ridiculousness? We'll do it without the whammy bars because we're indie rockers. We play Telecasters and Les Pauls, and we don't wear spandex. We wear Pilot DeGunner t-shirts. And so that was the premise at first, that we'll just kind of like write this song.
At this point, was your bass player or your drummer even? No. It was just the two of you.
It was just the two of us, and so we created this demo and we called it Bang Camaro.
Amazing.
And to me, it sounded like the Scorpions, and like that was the idea. And
that's
we just thought it was fucking hilarious.
You guys do sound like Rock You Like a Hurricane.
Yeah, that first song is supposed to sound like that. Even some of the guitar breaks are really kind of built off of that. You have to remember that back in 2005, man, like that kind of music or that kind of approach to, trying to make something new was very much a four-letter word. Like nobody wanted to hear about Def Leppard or Poison in their music,
You're talking to someone that was living in L.A. in '84. When, I worked with Poison, actually.
Like,
so
and like, that's
I
why
totally
I
understand that whole thing that was going on. But when you... Okay, so I'm going to just... Because there's a lot to talk to you about.
Sorry, yeah.
When you guys decided you wanted to do this, how did you... Who came up with the idea, let's get a bunch of... Like the gang vocal thing, which was so... different. I don't want to use the word novelty, but other people
You could.
It was kind of a novelty kind of
gimmick.
thing. And how did you come up with this group of guys, the original guys?
Well, the guys were all of our friends. When we got into it, we thought, all right, we're going to do this thing where we want to kind of recreate these, like, shout at the devil, we are the youth gone wild.
Yeah.
These big gang choruses that were very prevalent in that music of the era. And the process of getting so many people involved was out of ignorance, because we didn't know how they recorded those things. We just assumed that you just stick a lot of people around a microphone and just get them to sing the same thing at the same time. It turns out it's not that simple. But that's how it kind of started off, that we invited, mutual friends. Like, Bryn knew this guy named Rod. I didn't know Rodrigo Von Stoli. I didn't know this guy, so he invites Rod. I knew a guy named Tom, and he sang with a band called the Bon Savants. And, like, I just love this. Tom is just a great guy, and, like, he's a great singer. I invited him down, and then...
Did you want to have a chorus of guys? Or did it just add on?
No, it was just like, you have to understand that we're not thinking that we're going to do this in front of anybody. We're just making this recording because it's hilarious.
You didn't think you were going to be on the Conan O'Brien show?
No, not at all. Not at all. So we made this thing by inviting our friends over, and, like, we put them around a microphone. But then also there's strength in numbers, because we were kind of creating a groundswell around, like, this was just something unique. And it was around, this idea that we're going to drink a lot of beer and just have a lot of fun, And so it kind of, like, created this swell of, like, camaraderie with whoever we were inviting. And then what happened was we had this song, Bang Camaro, all right? We had our friends come over, and they're like, all right, cool. What are the lyrics? Bang Camaro. That's all you're going to sing. And they're like, we fucking love it. Let's do it. So we put the song on. We think it's a lark. Bryn and I are still, I think, on the side thinking, like, we're going to do this. We're going to do a real band on, like, once we get this thing out of the way. And so we put it on MySpace, all right? Created the Bang Camaro account, MySpace, boom. My friend Dave, he was the bass player for the Good North. He's from New Zealand, He happens to be the guy I've known I've known him longer than anybody I've known living here in Boston. And so he got wind of what we were doing, and then that kind of gave him license to say, hey, mate, I grew up on all that stuff too. Like, he's just like, I love Megadeth, and and all the time I knew the guy in the Good North. Like, we didn't, we just listened to Britpop or whatever the fuck that we were into. So he made us a T-shirt that just said Bang Camaro on it. Like, with all, like, he stole, like, iconography from all of, like, the famous bands and assembled this T-shirt. And we thought it was so cool that we were just like, hey, do you just want to say you're in the band? You can just say you're the bass player. And he was like, yep. And so, boom, we had a bass player. And I don't even think he played like on the recording that we had put out there. Anyway, long story short, it went up on MySpace, and within a month, we got contacted by agents from who were representing the Misfits, and the other one was Death from Above, 1979, saying, "Will you come play with us?" We didn't have we had nothing. It was just me and Bryn, and we just made this song. I think Bryn played most of the guitars on it. There wasn't even like a real drummer on it. It was all like a fake, Rick Allen style Rick drum.
I got to ask you, when you finally decided you were going to play some shows and stuff, how did clubs? See, I wasn't around for this. I was living on the West Coast. What was it like when you went to a club? Well, we have a band and we got like 10 singers in the band. I mean, how did the clubs react to that?
With horror. Yeah, they at first they would look at us. They're like, "Are you sure that you what? Like, you sure you want how many microphones on stage?
Do you need that many guys?
Just can you just put them all around a couple? No, everybody gets their own microphone. So from very.
Do you remember where some of the shows happened?
Yeah, I do. So one of our singers, Rich LeCaine, the ever so famous Richie Haas, he used to throw these bangers, these huge parties at his house.
I know Richie Haas.
Yeah, these were like the types of parties that you would see in like John Hughes movies, and so one of them he asked Bang Camaro to come play, and we thought this would be a perfect opportunity for that sort of thing. So we went to a local print shop, had a bunch of T-shirts made, and we handed them out to whoever was in the band. So
you guys did it right.
Yeah, so we would know who's in the band when we go down there. And so we ended up going into Richie's basement, and we just played. I think at that point we had maybe 6 songs, and we played them all. Everybody went wild, and there was a clear vibe because it was like everybody, when you have numbers like that and you play in a basement, it's like everybody's in the band. And from then, we got booked at our very first show, which was at the Paradise.
Paradise. Wow, good place for the first show.
Well, that was the other thing. We decided, listen, if we're going to, try to put this thing on stage with all of the...
We need a big stage.
We need a big stage, and if we're going to have to move heaven and earth to try to make this thing happen without it being a total train wreck, we're going to shoot for all the biggest places where we can do it. And because we kind of had this arrogance around, we had all been playing in the area for the greater part of a decade, doing the thing where put your demo together, get some sort of online presence, hand out your flyers, and then maybe Randy's going to give you a Sunday night at TT's, and we
I
were
like Randy.
Yeah, dude, we can sit here and talk about Randy for an hour. I love Randy.
Yeah, I do too. She was one of the best ever.
So we decided we're not going to do any of that. If we're going to do anything, we're just going to make it like we're the biggest band on the planet from day one. And so we did that show at the Paradise, and we were the first act of 4, but the place was sold out when we went on. And from that moment, it went from what a ridiculous idea this is to we have a manager, we have a booking agent, we have all this label interest, we have more music coming out on this video game, half of us quit our jobs. It just snowballed so fast.
When did you get the invite to go on TV? Excuse me for not knowing if that was after the first record or the second record, because I know you put 2 records out in consecutive years. How did you end up on Conan O'Brien? Because I've watched that clip so many times, and I've watched it in amazement. How the fuck did they pull this off? I just thought it was just incredible marketing.
I think that was the culmination of a lot of hard work. Because when the band did take off, it was a full-time job, and we treated it as such. Bryn and I are, we'd never been those guys that kind of sit around and wait for people to do things for us. We're very type A personalities, want to, get out there and going. So it was a culmination of a lot of work, a lot of traveling, a lot of money that came in and then went right back out, getting the band on the road and getting us some notoriety, as well as, being able to have these video games promote us, which was such an amazing thing at that time. Because, remember back in 2007, there was this big thing about how Napster had laid waste to, whatever the corporate structure of the music industry had become at
Oh,
that
it
point.
did.
I'm sure you know.
I know all about it.
And then Radiohead came along in 2008 and put out In Rainbows and said, you can have this record. You can give us what you want, but you can have this record. All right, which was such a great story because, like, if you look back on that, they made millions of dollars overnight when they did that. But the problem was, at least for Bang Camaro, was like, well, what happens to those of us who are trying to get something going outside of this label system? Like, we're in video games. Like, how do we get this to translate in the same way? And that became our story, that we became this band that was getting pushed by this new engine in the industry. And it worked out really well. I think what ended up happening to us, and you didn't ask me for this commentary, but I'll give it to you, is that video game fans aren't necessarily music fans. And, like, don't get me wrong, like, people that really supported Bang Camaro and, like, because we came to them through, like, these rhythm video games, a lot of them were really into games. They're really into, like, these new ways of, like, interacting with other people and having these experiences. And that never really translated to ticket sales. So after a while, our shows became not really all that well attended because in Boston, we're this, rogue, drunk warlock of a rock band, but everywhere else, we were this video game band. So there were a lot of, like, young teenagers wanting to come out and see us who can't come out and drink their faces off and make really bad decisions at the end of the night when that's really what the band was all about.
All right, I'm going to fast forward here all the way to, like, 2022. I heard that HBO contacted you guys about coming up with a song. I mean, did you actually write the song Push Push Lady Lightning? I mean, was it created for Peacemaker or?
No. So Push Push Lady Lightning was essentially, it was our first, like, real single. It came out on Guitar Hero 2.
Okay, so that's an old song.
So, like, that's
forgive me for not knowing
no,
that.
that's fine. That's essentially, that's a song that kind of got us out there. So there's a whole generation of people who grew up on those games who remember the band for that song. Just like, oh, I would get so far in the game, and then other songs got unlocked, and it was usually Push Push Lady Lightning. And so James Gunn, the filmmaker, who's now the head of DC Studios,
big dude.
He's a big dude, but and evidently he likes a lot of the music that you and I, have kind of come up on. And so when he was making the series Peacemaker, he was dipping into a lot of the 70s, like late 70s, like he'd kind of like gone through the glam stuff with the Guardians of the Galaxy stuff. And so he's like leaning into kind of like the lesser known like hair metal things. And as it turns out, I think he kind of like regarded us in that same vein. So he reached out to us because he liked the band. He really liked the song. He wrote a scene with our song in mind.
Wow.
Which is pretty amazing. He sent us the script years ago that spelled the entire thing out. So when you go watch that series, that scene is exactly how it's written. And so it showed us that he really wanted us to be a part of that. And so it ended up getting us all together being like, oh my God, like, hey, remember Bang Camaro, you guys? And so we ended up kind of hanging out, like me and like Bryn, and I almost called him Brian. I was calling him Brian as a joke. We started kind of hanging out to figure out, how we're going to handle the business side of things.
Is Bang Camaro like back together again? On Wikipedia, it has like about 20 new singers listed, and I'm like, what? Including like Michelle Paula's, and it's like, oh, they've expanded now,
The jig is up. So when we kind of got all that going with HBO, it forced a lot of us who, don't get me wrong, we've been friends over the years, but like we never get in the same room to talk about Bang Camaro. And when we did, I think the morning that we first when we first got together, Bryn, he's like, hey, I was in the shower and like I was thinking about this thing, and before we knew it, we just ended up with a song, and we were like, oh, why don't we just write another song? It'd be great. We get contacted by fans all the time, just saying, hey, it'd be great if you guys would come do something new. And so in the time that we booked studio time just to go record that song.
I'm sorry. Too Fast to Fall in Love
Yeah.
was a new song. And there's We Know You Know is also, I heard both those songs. Yeah. So those are brand new.
Those are brand new. So we'd written Too Fast to Fall
I
in
got a
Love.
little confused with the HBO. Sorry, man.
Oh,
I
no, that's
realized
totally
that
fine.
was an old song.
I'm confused by it myself. So we ended up writing the song Too Fast to Fall in Love, which was funny because when we put out our first record, I remember this was a joke that we had in the van. I remember I turned to Bryn one day. I was like, we should have written a song called Too Fast to Fall in Love. Like, it really puts those, those two iconic titles together. And so we always, we'd laugh about it. And so 13 years later, Bryn was like, I was thinking about that title. And he came to us with a song that was almost nearly completed. And when he did that, both Dave, our bass player, and I were kind of like, wow, it's funny that you mentioned that because I think I have a song too. And so I pushed one forward, and then Dave pushed another one forward, and then when we thought we were going to make just a single for our fans, we ended up writing an entire new record within like a couple of weeks, and it was like one of these things where it's just like, well, you never know, you never know what might happen.
You don't. And you know what? This is going to be the greatest segue ever because I don't know. I could be wrong, but I see Bang Camaro, and I did mention Novelty, and I don't mean that as an insult or anything. And then you get Worshipper, which is a very serious band. With serious artwork, serious songs. You got John Brookhouse, really good. We had two great guitar players, you and John. Dave Jarvis, who I knew when he played rhythm guitar in a band called Humans Being. And Bob Maloney. Yeah, he did. He was in a hardcore band.
Well,
and Bob Maloney, who has been like, Crack Torch. I mean, he's really like a guy that's been around for a while. Your life is like, you got like, Worshipper to me is like one of the best bands.
You're very kind
Boston.
to say so, Steve. I really like that band. Thank you. So I'll try to.
I didn't mean to like slip away from Bang Camaro, but I got to talk to you about Worshipper.
Yeah. So Worshipper happened. I think we got together in 2013. I have to preface this by just talking about my band Township, called the Family Township.
Which they're on my list too.
Yep. So Township is this. They were Rumble winners from 2006. Like when Bang Camaro was doing our thing, Township was very much up and coming doing their thing. When Bang Camaro stopped working, I had a lot more time on my hands, and I got a phone call from Mark Pinansky saying, "Will you come join my band? Here are all the songs." And of course, I went for it. Those guys are my brothers. They have
family.
They're my family. They really are. They've scratched every itch in wanting to play music collaboratively, creatively with other people. They're everything I've ever idealized in that experience. But having said that, there was a point where I really wanted to play something heavy. I really wanted to play really loud music. I wanted to chug on my guitar. I wanted to make palm mutes and stuff like that. Because when I was a kid, I really liked thrash metal music. And, that type of aggression was something that I was never able to kind of get out because I never found like-minded people who wanted to make that kind of music. I just never found myself in those circles. And so after Bang Camaro, I was, and with Township going, I'd met a few people. So one of those people was John Brookhouse. And if anybody knows John Brookhouse, like, he's a phenomenal guitar player.
Yeah.
All right? Like, he's just one of those guys who, like, when you see John play, you're like, yeah, that guy's on the level. Like, he's there. And I knew that I wanted to make a heavy band, and I wanted to do it with him. So we would chat online all the time. We have a lot of the same common interests. Would listen to a lot of the same things. And he was really good about getting me involved in, like, this new kind of scene of heavy music that kind of was coming off of the heels of bands like Mastodon and Baroness, things I was listening to at the time. And so we put together Worshipper, as a labor of like, hey, we love this kind of music. Let's make something super heavy if we can. And from day one, like, when you talk to any of those guys, they'll give you a different story. But my story was, I handpicked all three of those guys. I wanted to play in a band with Dave Jarvis, Bob Maloney, and John Brookhouse. And I went about my way and fooled all three of them into being in a band with me. And dude, we rehearsed for a year before we even like really talked about telling people that we were in a band, and we really wanted to kind of get a good vibe going.
And then when you did record Benny Grotto, and I know you did something with Minahan too, you like really went with the best guys around and wanted to make it sound like amazing. I didn't mean to skip over Township because I know that was actually before Worshiper, because I was going to talk about that, but there is a connection here too, because I know that when I heard that first Township record, not the Mad Oak Live record, the One More Summer, I was listening to that, I'm like, these guys are like Thin Lizzy. You know, that's the first thing that came. And then I saw that Worshiper actually was on a Thin Lit Johnny, one of my favorite Thin Lizzy songs. You guys actually, so I think there's some Thin Lizzy in your blood too. There's got to be, man.
Without a doubt.
Little connection here with Thin Lizzy.
Well, I mean, there are the 10,000 hours I probably spent listening to that band as a young person.
But I know I just went all over the place, you know. But getting back to Worshiper, you know, let me ask you about that, because when were you approached about the Thin Lizzy cover, and did you guys like, how did that happen? I mean, because
we have had the great fortune, Worshiper, of, you know, when you go out there on the road, you get to meet all the other bands that are doing the same thing that you're doing. And, you know, there's this group out of Oceanside, California called the Great Electric Quest, and they got their own record label, Glory or Death Records. And when they were spooling it up, like kind of like as an appreciation thing for their own label, they would come up with these compilations just to celebrate all the music that they love. So they did one for Thin Lizzy. You know, I think they're doing one for Judas Priest right now. And so since we were mates, we did like a small East Coast tour with them many years ago, and they're just like, we're not going to put this record out until you guys give us a fucking Thin Lizzy cover. It's funny that you mentioned that. I totally forgot that.
Too. What a good song.
I don't even remember making that, honestly.
I don't think I wrote down where you record. Not Chris Johnson. You worked with Chris Johnson a lot.
We did that with Chris.
Was it Chris Johnson?
Yeah.
I didn't have that here.
Chris is just the sweetest, most talented person I've
really
ever...
good engineer.
Dude,
You've worked with some really good engineers, by the way.
Chris Johnson was the intern at the Moon Tower Studios in 2008 when we were making the second Bang Camaro record. And in the intervening years, since I've been like, you know, I tour and like, you know, I play music, but, you know, I've done a lot of teaching. And I love telling my students the story about making this record, and the intern was Chris Johnson, all right? He was just the sweetest, nicest, most talented guy at the time, so unassuming. He had a lot to do with making that record sound the way that it did. But then over the years, you see what that guy has accomplished in his life. And I just want to remind you to always be nice to the interns, because you're probably going to be working for one of them one day.
It's true.
So, Chris, if you're listening to this, I need a job.
Oh man, let's see. So basically, okay, Township was doing something recently, right? Yeah. Did you take part in that?
Yeah. Oh, so, they better not be working without me.
So are you in like 3 bands now?
Yeah, I think technically, you know, Steve, at our age, they're projects.
Our age.
They're projects.
I'm a lot older than you, dude. Don't say our age. You're a kid compared to me, pal. I'll tell you. So what's going on for the future here? I mean, what do you got planned here with all of these bands? Like, give me a summary on each. I was going to mention, too, that I know in 2012 you played on the Blue Evil Twin record, which was a really good record. Did you play?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. Did you play on more than one record with Blue, or just that record? I found that on Discogs.
So I think
it's my Bible.
I think Discogs. With Blue, like we did a lot of recording, but I don't know if the work that I did with him, if all of it ended up on one record, or if it kind of like got split up into some places. I know that one of my favorite things that I got to do with Blue was he called me up one day. And he's like, I'm working on this track. I just got the basics done last night. You want to come over and play guitar on it? And I'm like, yeah. So I come over there, and like he's playing me the track, and he's like, yeah, my buddy Steve was playing the drums on this last night. He's talking about Steve Gorman from the Black Crowes, and I remember thinking, I was just like, it was like for me at the time, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be on a record with Steve Gorman. And he was telling me the story about how if you listen to that guy play the drums, like he hits that snare drum so hard to get that recognizable Steve Gorman sound that they said that they couldn't really even get a full take out of him because he would end up destroying the snare drum before they'd get to the end of the song every time. Which I thought was hilarious. So yeah.
So give me a summary of each project and what you got coming with each project, because I have something else I have to ask you, but I want to hear.
Definitely. Let's
start with Worshipper.
So with Worshipper, we
just were recording a New Alliance recently, right?
We've been working on what's going to be our third record. I think we're about 80% of the way through it. I think. We've spent ever since the pandemic.
That hurt everybody.
Yeah. We haven't really kind of gotten back to the whole going out traveling.
You did put out that Lonesome Boredom Overdrive because I played that on my show. I love that track. Yeah, that was during the pandemic. You released that.
That's one of my riffs, man. I like
that's good, man. Yeah, brag about your riffs.
Yeah, that's one of our heavier riffs. I really like that.
It's got to be really amazing just hanging around in a room with you and Brookhouse together. I'm like, how the hell you get two guitar players like this in one room? I mean, damn.
You should have that conversation with Dave Jarvis.
Like, what does he think? He's the better guitar player of the
probably.
three?
And he probably is. So with Worshipper, we got that record that we're working on. I think it's probably going to come out sometime next year, and we'll kind of spool up the,
You guys tour a lot.
Yeah,
so
we try to when we have something that's worthwhile, and we really just want to get out there and play good shows, and really just be able to play with other bands that we really like. That's really kind of like the goal there. That's just kind of like spool up these experiences and just see all the music and art that we usually experience at home, but be able to experience it in person. If we're able to do that, then we're winning. Township, we're back at it at full speed. We're, I'd say, about 80% of the way through our new record.
Who's recording that?
We've been doing that with Dave Westner.
Over at Woolly Mammoth.
Yeah, in some other spots, but like Dave's a genius, and he's been making us, keeping us honest, and keeping that record moving. So Township's been working with Red on Red Records, and we've been getting some stuff out through them. So super excited about what's happening there. That band is like, we're now I think in our 20th, somewhere in like our 18th year or something like that.
Yeah, and 2010 Live at Mad Oak came
up. Well, that was like their fifth record. Like I'm their fourth guitar player.
That was their fifth record.
Yeah, their fourth or fifth record. They had a whole career before I even joined the band.
Oh, I didn't realize.
You got to go check out those records.
I wasn't around for a lot of this. I apologize for not knowing every. I mean, you've been on like your Discogs page is like pretty long, dude. You've been on a lot of records. So.
I had no idea. I should look at that site.
You should. You're a star.
So in the intervening years, we haven't even talked about this. I've been playing with Sarah Borges and the Broken Singles.
Oh, cool.
With my buddy Binky and
that's a country.
Yeah, it's a completely different kind of gig, and
you're versatile.
Yeah, well, I think Sarah has just been a little accepting of like, all right, well, let this rock and roll guy, do his things to my
I'd
songs.
like to see you play with Sarah. That would be really interesting.
Sarah, Binky, and Nate are some of the sweetest, nicest people. I love them dearly. I hope one day we get together and get to play music again. We've done a lot of traveling together. I very much enjoy playing with them. And you're right, and that's a completely different. It's a 180 from Worshipper.
So you're like a full-time musician, pretty much. Yeah, that's fantastic, man.
Yeah.
So many people have to do so many things, but you're in demand. You're in demand.
I wouldn't go that far. I spend a lot of time at home in my shorts, but
I demanded you came on my podcast, didn't I? All right, here's the two questions I want to ask you before we go here. What do you think, in your opinion, of the current Boston music scene as it is after we just went through a horrible thing, the pandemic? Do you think it's rebounding, and how do you feel about how it looks out there right now?
It's kind of a hard question because honestly, I don't leave the house. I feel like I've kind of been outside of what the scene has been doing, and delightfully,
well, you leave the house to go to a recording studio.
Yeah, maybe, or to
rehearsal.
Space. Right. Yeah. And then I go, because I got two dogs at home, and they're.
So you're not following the live scene much?
I don't really know. I kind of, I'm embarrassed to say that I've really kind of fallen out of all that. I think it's kind of a function of age a little bit. You kind of get a little bit comfortable. Not to cry cry about anything, but like, over the years I've endured massive hearing loss.
Oh.
So going out,
What?
yeah. So like going out to a club is something that I can't really. I mean, I can do it. It's just like I
can
can't
relate.
talk to anybody, and like it really kind of feeds on your sense of self and your anxiety. So I think I've kept it at home a lot because of that.
Are you listening to CDs and excuse me? You listen to records? I don't listen to CDs.
I do the vinyl thing.
CD was a total slip up by me, by the way, because I just listen to records and I listen to Spotify or whatever.
I do that, but from what I've seen here in the local music scene, like there are still my friends. They're like the lifers who are still out there making new things. Like look at Helen McWilliams. She's got this band, One Fall. And like,
did they win the Rumble?
I think they just won the Rumble, which I didn't go to. I should have. That was stupid. But I've been following them, and like their music is fucking great. All right, and so we had, and like, forgive me, Helen, for saying that you guys are like lifers, because you guys have been around for a little while. But because of like I've been following like the bands like that, I've been seeing like a lot of other groups that people have started to talk about who. Kind of like will turn your head and make you go like, oh, wait a second, like that is pretty good. Like, because I think you can get a little bit jaded and you think to yourself like, my friends are making, it's a nice little record that they're making, and that, that they have barbecues and they make their music together. That's nice. Which I guess is kind of like my exposure to live music lately and not necessarily the Boston music scene.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot like that. I didn't know if you were out in clubs or checking out bands or not. Okay, here's the other question I want to ask you. It's a good one. Who are your all-time favorite guitar players? Because you're a great guitar player, and I want to hear who influenced you.
Oh, thank you for that question. I love that question, and if we had hours, I could talk about it.
You can give me your top. I'll give you my top 5. How's that?
All right, I'll go with that.
You do yours first, though.
When I started, when I was a kid, I saw Steve Steeman Clark. I think it was the Rock of Ages video. And I don't know, for some reason.
You're a big Def Leppard
fan.
fan.
I was like, that guy. That guy's just cool. Like, so I really kind of got into what his fashion sense and just kind of like, just his vibe. But then when he kind of got into like what he contributed, like he's a fucking massive guitar player. And then, of course, there's Randy Rhoads. I don't think I could, I couldn't leave the house, or I couldn't do anything if it wasn't for St. Randy. I got him all over my house, staring down at me. In recent years, like Eddie Van Halen, undeniable. Like not only was he
rest in peace.
Yeah, not only was he an innovative guitar player, he was an inventor. Like he made things. He like I play Stratocaster guitars in the vein that he did because he invented that, But then I would be remiss if I didn't get into, as a teenager and in my 20s and 30s, like I didn't listen to rock music. I was listening to Johnny Greenwood. I was listening to
good one.
Yeah, my favorite guitar player of all time is Graham from Blur, Graham Coxon.
Wow.
Dude, Graham, like
really?
Dude, did you hear the new Blur? I don't know if you guys are Blur fans, but Blur just like surprised everybody. And
I haven't heard it yet.
They're coming out with a new album. They came out with a new single like 2 weeks ago. It's all I listen to now. Wow. So that's what I'm listening to is the new Blur record. But Graham Coxon for me is like he's the guy.
I love your list, dude, because you didn't name one person I would name.
Really?
I'm in the old Brian May, Jeff Beck, Tony Iommi.
Yeah, but like those are also givens too, because like 5 isn't enough, because those are all.
You must be a Sabbath fan.
Only in my adult years, like growing up, Sabbath was my dad's music. I liked Ozzy. I liked The Ultimate Sin and Jakey Lee, and my dad was like.
Yeah, you mentioned Randy Rhoads. That's why I thought maybe you were a Sabbath guy too.
Oh yeah, but like now, like I've gone and done my homework. Of course, can't.
Dude, thanks a lot, man, for coming down here, because I enjoy talking to you. I'm sorry I was all over the place.
Unbelievable. I'll write you a little.
You get
note
too many
it.
records, man. You're on too many records.
Steve, thanks for having me, man.
My pleasure, man. My pleasure, totally.